I wanted to talk a little bit more about some different perspectives about how the brain may be related to creativity. And so these perspectives are different from the modernist, rationalist measurements related to the brain perspectives, but suggest a relationship. And one of those perspectives is found in Marion Woodman's paper, Honoring the Body. And so she talks about agreeing with Jung in the idea that perception is a creative act in itself. It's not separate, it's not objective to be measured, but it's a creative act. And she quotes Black saying that the body is a portion of the soul that also senses and has inlets, that expands to include the unconscious, which is also involved in perception. So she's saying it's creative, it's subjective, it's not measurable, that the body takes in sensory information, that the body is related to the soul and to the unconscious, and through this creative and subjective act then we perceive. And so per Jung and Woodman, the unconscious is a source of consciousness. Woodman asks how much unconscious preparation is needed to register a sense impression, and also asks the question, what is it that we perceive? That there is an influence of unconscious material in perception and how that becomes meaningful to us. The registering of a sense perception is considered to be subjective, involving the unconscious, and that Woodman considers muscles and nerves as portions of the soul that are connected to the unconscious. So she infers that the brain is involved because the brain if the brain is considered to be the location of the unconscious, then the brain is part of this subjective act of perception, that which is creative. So that's a perspective that's quite different from the perspectives that we talked about in the last lecture. And then if you look at Lewis Hyde's essay, a very creative essay about alcohol and poetry, I included that because if we think about the influences of alcohol on behavior, on creativity, we're also inferring that there is an effect of the brain, because scientific studies have demonstrated alcohol's effect on brain neurophysiology. So since alcohol affects the brain, we're implying this relationship between the brain and creativity. And Hyde uses examples of poetry as he discusses those relationships. He talks about the effect of alcohol as an anesthetic that impairs the ability to sense creatively and results in a loss of aesthetic power. Per Hyde, when an author becomes possessed by alcohol, he or she is unable to create, and this suggests the importance of brain and brain function. Alcohol affects the brain, which impairs the ability to create. Illich talks about the fact that discomfort leads us to find a solution. Discomfort meaning a problem in our lives, or pain or suffering, and that this seeking a solution could be considered to be a creative act. So think about the way that neuroscientists talk about creativity, that problem solving, divergent or convergent thinking are required. And so Illich and Hyde are saying that something moves us to use those problem solving processes, but a chemical that affects the brain can impair the ability for that to happen. If the brain's anesthetized upon the realization of the problem, but before the creative act has occurred, then it's not possible to come up with this solution, this novel creative act. Per Hyde, pain then is a motivation, and so it's important for that pain to be present and not anesthetized so that the creator can create. Interestingly, Hyde talks about societal changes that have happened in the last 50 years the focus on individuals, on money, on power, the use of machines as being damaging to the individual because these become related to self-medication and dampening creative abilities. Interestingly, he also talks about the fact that in order to create, there must be a letting go of the conscious ego. But if this is perceived to be a threat, and he's saying that this is the case with persons who abuse alcohol, then there's never a possibility for the creative inspiration that comes forth from the unconscious to be useful in a creative act. And so self-medication squelches this, and creative work is not possible. So Woodman and Hyde's perspectives are quite different from the neuroscientists, but still suggest in an inferred way the importance of the brain to creativity. I look forward to discussing these papers and our work some more this week on the discussion board. So hit the ground running, and I also promise you that we're not going to be reading a lot more of these very heavy scientific papers. We'll be moving in different directions. It's important, though, to consider this as a perspective on what creativity is.